Senator Langford for his questions. I think it's an important thought exercise to consider where we were with space technology 10 years ago when it was ground zero, when it was 0 hour for that technology. I think, at least from my perspective, I think it's very, very clear that our complete lack of export controls, our complete lack of paying attention to the protection of our IP has allowed China to build something in outer space that's our near-peer competitor, or even worse than that, without the expense that we went through to develop this, without the expertise, and without the society that Dr. Ding has talked about, which I never would bet against either. But I do think that is a serious problem that we have just, spent the last 10 years doing with respect, a serious issue with respect to space, and I hope we find a way to avoid it here, which I think is your point. I definitely want us to avoid it here. Dr. Jensen, something you said at the very beginning of the hearing caught my attention, and I thought it was worth more elaboration. So what if you find yourselves in a Cuban Missile Crisis again, or something equivalent to that? You've obviously thought about that, so let's talk about that. What would that look like today versus what that would have looked like in the early 1960s when President Kennedy was trying to reach the decisions that he was trying to make, Khrushchev was trying to reach the decisions he was trying to make, and both people were making fundamental mistakes of judgment along the way. And in the end, it resolved itself in the best resolution possible for humanity. What does that look like in an AI charged situation?
So after this meeting, Senator, I'm going to send you the generative AI artwork we did on this to have it imagine a Salvador Dali paint a Edward Murrow type news broadcast of that moment, and it is both beautiful and deeply disturbing.
I'm going to hang it up right next to Angus's poem.
Yeah, Dr. Seuss meets nuclear war.
Exactly.
So this came out of actually a series of tabletop games we did for the Defense Threat Reduction
Actually,
Agency.
we should ask ChatGPT, if you're listening, we should ask them.
Yeah.
Run the scenario for us.
Just don't ask a man.
AI, but you're going to do it for us, so go ahead.
I'll do it for you. But we did this in a tabletop for DTRA, thinking about what exactly would a critical crisis moment look like. And one of the most interesting things is there's such a tendency to move faster, but faster isn't better, even when you're analyzing data. And what we found is a lot of the discussion was about how, just as actually Senator Rubio was talking about, you're getting information, correct or incorrect, and now it's triggering these very human instincts, right? We're all of a sudden getting afraid, we're nervous, your heart's racing. It's the person interacting with the algorithm. There is no pure machine. What we found is actually maybe our earlier generation of statesmen and women were brilliant by slowing down crisis decision making. If you've ever seen like the red phone, it's not a phone, it's a telex for a reason, because it deliberately slows down and makes you deliberate. So what we walked away with is you're going to be fine in the crisis if you know when to slow down and not let the machine speed you up. Now, how do we get there? Again, this is why at CSIS and the Futures Lab and the ISP program, we are running tons of tabletop. Actually, I've seen some staffers here. We invite congressional staffers out because if we don't actually think about those moments now, in a very human sense, this isn't necessarily fine-tuning the algorithm, it's those interactions.
How about if you had to replay kind of on a day-to-day basis the decisions that were made about our nuclear arsenal or the Soviet Union's nuclear arsenal? Have you guys thought about that at all, what that would look like?
Sure. And so at the Office of Net Assessment in the late 70s, early 80s, when they funded the RAND RAS program, where they used old school expert system AI to actually do large-scale modeling of what strategic competition looked like, the military balance, and actually to fight entire simulated campaigns. So what Senator Cornyn is saying is true. We've been experimenting with variations of the science of the artificial. Intelligence isn't quite there for generations. And I think we'll continue to do so because ultimately crisis decision-making is about people, it's about politics, and it's about emotion even more than the models in front of you.
I think one of the, just if I could lay on one more, not another question, just an observation, Mr. Chairman, before I stop. We've had this discussion today about a race, in effect, and can we win the race, or is China going to win the race? And it sort of, I think we haven't had a discussion about how do we get to an end state here where AI reflects the values that this democracy supports in terms of freedom, in terms of rights, in terms of free speech and other kinds of things, so that if there are people that are unfortunate enough on planet Earth to live in a totalitarian society where the authoritarian is rolling out that sort of AI system, there is something available to the rest of humanity that is not that lowest, common denominator or uncommon denominator. I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect that has a lot less to do with some sort of race with China than ensuring that as we think about the implementation here, we're doing it in a way that actually is true to those core values that we have. And that, among other things, is going to look a lot different than the rollout of social media over the last 15 years or so, as you said at the outset of this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And a brilliant